Well, thank you, Dr. Glennon. Dr. Glennon wanted to have a graduate of ETSU that went into politics speak to you today. And so he initially asked the smartest politician to be here, and he said no. And then he asked the most talented politician to be here, and he said no. And then he asked the most handsome politician to be here. I said yes, I'll do it. I felt guilty turning them down 3 times in a row, but I'm just teasing. But it's such an honor to be here. It's honored. I'm glad to be out of the house, to be honest with you, with 5 kids. But I want to tell you that when I was at ETSU in your seats, there was a movie out that was called Back to the Future with Michael J. Fox. I don't know if y'all heard of it, but in that movie there was a DeLorean, and it was like a time machine, and you could get in that DeLorean and go back in time. And so I want you to imagine for a second that DeLorean is here. And we can get into that DeLorean together. And I'd like to take you back in time, all the way back to the campus of East Tennessee State University on September 8, 1986, my senior year. And if we went back there and you open the doors of this car and you look around, you would see 3 things. Number 1, you would see me sitting in the exact same seats that you are today. 2, you would see a freshman walking around the campus named Kenny Chesney. And 3, at the Culp Center on the TV screens, you would see a brand new show that debuted that day called The Oprah Winfrey Show. And now that we fast forward several decades, you can see that all of us in our own way have made our own little path of success. And Kenny went on to take over country music. Oprah took over the TV channels. And just this week, I took out the trash twice without being yelled at to do it from my wife. And so we all had our own little path to get there. Today, I'm going to talk to you about 3 topics. No big deal, just 3 topics. 1, a little bit about me. 2, about my new book. And 3, what I wish I knew when I was in your seats as an ETSU student. And first, a little bit about me. Dr. Glennon wanted me to explain how is it that in this 110-year history of ETSU, I became the first person elected to the U.S. Congress. What's the story behind the story? And so I'm going to tell you that. It started, and it's a little embarrassing, but at Wendy's in Orlando. And I was fired from Wendy's. The manager said, quote, "You just don't have what it takes to make it in fast food." I was flipping the burgers too slow. So what do you do when you're told you're not good enough to even work in fast food? I felt like I only had one choice, to be a U.S. congressman. And so I decided that my first step in this path would be coming to ETSU. Both my parents had been here, but they divorced when I was young, and I grew up in Orlando and grew up kind of poor. My mom was a single mom, and I didn't have enough money to come. And even after getting Pell Grants and student loans, I was short. And my mom was a secretary, she said, "My boss, Mr. Overstreet, occasionally has me type up checks for charitable contributions that the company gives. Why don't you come meet with him to see if they'll make a charitable contribution to you?" So I made an appointment with Mr. Overstreet, and I was 17 years old. He was 81, the president of Overstreet Investment Company, and I made my pitch. And I said, "Mr. Overstreet, I want to go to college so bad. You won't be throwing money away if you help me. I promise. I'll be top of my class. It won't be a waste of your time." And he said, "Son, I'm just the president of this company. I have a board of directors that I have to answer to, and we're meeting on Tuesday morning. So if you come back Tuesday afternoon, I'll let you know the answer." And so I came back Tuesday afternoon. I hadn't slept the whole night before, and I was nervous. And he said, "Well, son, we met this morning, the board of directors, and they decided that they will not help you go to college. And it's nothing personal, but if they paid for your college, they'd have to do that for every other employee here." And so my intuition said, just be grateful and say thank you, because he tried. And I said, "Mr. Overstreet, thank you so much for at least trying." And as I was talking, just uncontrollably, tears started coming down my face, because I knew at that moment that I wasn't going to be going to college. And chokes me up now. And so he said, "Son, you can wipe the tears away." I said, "The company couldn't put you through college." I didn't say that I couldn't. And with that, he stroked a check. and sent me to ETSU. And 4 years later, I was up on the graduation stage at the Mini Dome, and there was good news and bad news. The good news was I did graduate first in my class. The bad news was I didn't think my parents would be very proud of me, because in my senior year, I had volunteered at the hospital, and I told them that I was going to be a doctor, and they'd already told everybody that their son was going to be a doctor, and I found out from working at the hospital that I hated everything about it. I don't like the sight of blood. I don't like the x-rays, the smell of the hospital, the cranky patients. I don't like it at all. And so as I stood there on graduation day, I was really conflicted, because my logic told me to go ahead and go to medical school. My intuition said, no, your gifts are more in speaking, communication. Why don't you be a lawyer or a politician? And I couldn't decide. And my girlfriend at the time was pre-med like me. She's a doctor now. And she wanted me to go to medical school. And she gave me as a graduation gift this beautiful stethoscope that was silver, several $100s, had my name engraved on it. And I did something pretty unconventional. I took that stethoscope and I used it to listen to my own heart. What did I want to do? And I decided, you know what, I'm gonna take a chance here, buddy. I'm gonna go for it and try to go to Congress. And so that was tough, because I had to give the stethoscope back. Now poor Rachel, not only does she have to get a new boyfriend, but because it's engraved with Ric Keller, she's got to find another guy named Ric Keller. So it was a tough hurdle for her. But from the moment I made that decision, doors seemed to open up. After that, I went to Vanderbilt Law School. I went back to Orlando, where I grew up, and got a job at a good firm. And I got involved in politics in a relatively unconventional way. Jeb Bush was a young guy, had never held public office before, and he was running for governor. And I became his joke writer. And I wrote a joke for him that he used to open up every single stump speech throughout the state of Florida. And the joke was, one of my opponents has accused me of running on my father's coattails. Well, to show that I'm running on my own merits, I've decided to go ahead and change my last name. Now, I don't know what I'm going to change it to yet, but it's either going to be Reagan or Eisenhower. Well, people laughed on the campaign trail, and he eventually got elected governor. And his first year in the governor's mansion, I decided that I was going to run for the United States Congress. It was an open seat, and 5 people were running. I was the biggest underdog. And I was criticized in that race for my lack of political experience. My main opponents both had 8 years of experience. One was a mayor, the other state legislator, and I had 0. And we were in a debate, and one of them called me an amateur compared to them. And I said, you know what? I am an amateur. But it was amateurs who built Noah's Ark, and it was professionals who built the Titanic. What boat do you want to be on? And I didn't hear about that issue anymore. And a few months later, even though I tried hard, it was a disaster. I was losing in the polls by 27 points, out fundraised 4-1, and the leader of my own party asked me to drop out. My intuition said, you got this, buddy. Just stay. It's going to be okay. And I don't know why I trust my intuition, but I do, no matter how unconventional or unpopular it seems, and you should too. And something happened a few weeks later. I got a phone call out of the blue asking me to come to Washington, D.C. to give a 5-minute speech. It was like American Idol for politicians. A newly formed group of CEOs had got together and decided to put some big money into a handful of congressional races. And they looked across the country, and they narrowed it down to 16 finalists and invited us to Washington. So I flew up there, the last one picked, last one called that day. Listened to the other 15 people go ahead of me. They were smooth as glass. You would know who they are, some famous people. Mike Pence was one of my competitors, for example. And they were all serious. And so I walked up to the podium and I said, you know what, guys? I've been in the back of the room for hours, and I feel like Elizabeth Taylor's 7th husband on his honeymoon night. Technically, I know what I'm supposed to do, but at this point, I don't know how to make it interesting for you. And those CEOs busted out laughing, and that little comment changed my life. that group ranked me #1 in the nation. And they spent $400,000 to support me. And a few months later, against all odds, I won a seat in the United States Congress. Now, I went on to serve for 8 years, became chairman of the Higher Education Committee, and used my influence, whatever I had, to increase Pell Grants, to help young people from low-income families go to college, because I needed help. And we increased Pell Grants by 62%. And as a result, an additional 5.5 million students got to go to college. So Mr. Overstreet, through his one act of kindness 20 years earlier, had literally impacted 5.5 million lives. Now, the high point for me was being invited to the Oval Office for a signing ceremony for my bill that I had written for higher education. And in the Oval Office with me is President George W. Bush and Senator Ted Kennedy, the leaders of the two biggest political dynasties in history, and me. And as I walked into the Oval Office that day, I thought back and said, you know, Wendy's fired me. Said I'm not good enough. Well, now I'm in the Oval Office, okay? And afterwards, that picture was in the paper, and someone wrote me. It said, you think you could serve our country? You can't even serve French fries. And I wrote back and said 3 words. Shut up, Mom. Shut up. And so that's the story behind the story of how I became the first ETSU graduate to get elected to Congress. The second thing I want to talk to you about today is a little bit about my book. And it's called Chase the Bears, Little Things to Achieve Big Dreams. And it was just released September 27th. And I'm happy to tell you that that day hit #1, Amazon bestseller list. And so there are people in this room who have bought this book, and I just want to say thank you to both of you. Now, the rest of you, step it up. You can get this on Amazon.com. Now, when I go on this book tour, people ask me 3 questions all the time. And the questions are simply, why'd you write it? Where's the funny name come from? And what's the book about? So I'll just briefly address those. Why did I write it? I didn't meet my dad until I was 14 years old. Even though they were at ETSU, they split, and I grew up with my mom. And the first time I met my dad, he handed me this paperback book that was his favorite book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And I read that book 6 times. I wasn't quite ready to call him Dad yet, just met him. But 3 years later, I was ready to call him Dad, and I was ready to do an experiment using the principles in that book. And that's when I set a goal to get it to be #1 in my class at ETSU. And that happened. Then I set a goal to get elected to Congress, and that happened. And so as I got older in life, I thought, man, what if I could write a book that would change young people's lives just like that book changed mine? How cool would that be? And that's why I wrote this book. Now, where did the name come from? Midway through writing this book, I was sitting at my kitchen table, having some coffee, reading the paper with my wife, Lori, and outside our window, this family of bears came running by. It was a mama bear and 3 cubs. We'd never seen that before. We're a mile or 2 from the woods. And so without thinking or even saying a word, we jumped up together and ran outside to chase these bears. And a Florida black bear can run up to 35 miles an hour. An Olympic sprinter can only run 28. So if that mama bear had decided to come back and chase us, she could have got us. Well, I mean, I think I could outrun Lori. Could have got Lori, you know? And so afterwards, I said to Lori, I said, you know, that's sort of a metaphor. Even though that was nuts, most people in life would stay inside, they'd play it safe, and they'd look out their window as life passes them by. And eventually, the clock runs out. Some people take a chance. They chase their dreams. They chase the bears. Lori said, Rick, that's the name of your book. And that's how I got the name. Now, what's the book about? It's simply about becoming the best version of yourself by using your gifts and taking chances that are aligned with your purpose. Now, it has lots of inspirational stories, but what makes it different from every other book written in the last 85 years, it tells you how to do it. It gives you a step-by-step formula of how to take your thoughts and dreams and convert them into reality. That's what makes the book special. Now, the book is called Little Things to Achieve Big Dreams in the subtitle. So the last thing I want to talk about are what are the 5 little things that I wish I knew when I was in college at ETSU. And the first and most important is use your gifts. Your gifts, your unique talents or skills, are the thing that you do the absolute best with the least amount of effort. And when someone tells you, you can do anything you want in life, well, that's BS. You can do anything you want in life if you stay in your lane and use your gifts. Now, Albert Einstein, a PhD in physics, won the Nobel Prize in physics. If he had instead decided to go outside his lane and try to be a professional bull rider, he would have landed on his butt in less than 8 seconds, okay? Stay in your lane. And you may say, well, how do I know what my gifts are? Well, I talk about it in the book, but here are some simple questions that will help you figure that out. What do you do the best with the least amount of effort? What comes easy to you, but it's hard for other people? What do you love doing? What do you do and time just flies by when you're doing this thing? What do you do that when you start doing it, you feel like you're about a 6, but an hour later, you feel like a 10? What gift do people associate you with? What job would you do for free? What job would you do if you knew you could not fail? That thing, whatever that thing is what you're supposed to be doing. That's your gift. So use your gifts every day, and that's the best step I can tell you on the step to success. Second thing I wish I knew, trust your intuition. I trust my intuition, no matter how unconventional or unpopular it seems, and you should too. Oprah trusts her intuition. Steve Jobs trusted his intuition. Successful people trust their intuition. It's your internal GPS system. You may think as an analogy of a prayer as being like a text message to God. Intuition is God texting you back. Listen to your intuition. Now, the best example I can give you for intuition is a fellow East Tennessean who you know, Dolly Parton. When Dolly graduated high school, they went around the room that night and asked everybody, what are they going to do? Dolly said, well, I'm going to go to Nashville and be a star. And everybody laughed at her. She felt embarrassed, but it didn't shake her confidence. So she went to Nashville. Not only did she become a star, 25 #1 hits on the country charts. Now, one of those hits was called I Will Always Love You. Hit #1 on the country charts. Elvis Presley loved that song so much, he went to Dolly and said, I'd like to record it as a pop song. And Elvis was her hero. She was thrilled. Absolutely, this is exciting. The night before the recording, his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, told Dolly, well, you know that you're going to have to sign over half of your songwriting credits, half of your royalties to us to record it. And she says, what are you talking about? This song's already on the radio, #1. I wrote it. She says, well, that's just how it is. We're going to need to make money. We need half the royalties. And she said no. She stood up to the king. No. She said, my heart, my intuition said, don't do that. That one decision made Dolly an incredibly wealthy woman. Because 18 years later, her phone rang. And it was a guy calling from Hollywood named Kevin Costner. And he was an actor and a director. He had a new movie coming out that he was producing called The Bodyguard. And he said, Dolly, we're casting Whitney Houston for the first time in this actress role in The Bodyguard. And I would like her to sing your song, I Will Always Love You. But only if we have your permission. And if you give us that permission, Dolly, you get to keep 100% of the royalties and songwriting credit. This time, Dolly said yes. Her intuition said yes. That song by Whitney Houston, I Will Always Love You, you probably heard it because it's the #1 selling record of all time in history by a female artist. Dolly said, when I recorded I Will Always Love You, I put money in the bank. When Whitney recorded it, I bought the bank. So that's what it's like to trust your intuition importance. The third thing is take a chance. Take a chance. You can still fail at what you don't want, so you might as well take a chance on doing what you love. Now, I'm not talking about crazy chances. I'm talking about educated baby step risk. And I'll give you an example as a student here. I wanted to be a doctor initially as a pre-med student, but I was a really mediocre student in high school. So when I showed up on campus my first semester as a baby step, I didn't start with organic chemistry and physics. I started with badminton and softball, public speaking, sociology. I picked the courses that were easiest for me and had a light load. and was able to get A's there, and that built my confidence. And then the next semester, also pretty easy, but instead of public speaking, advanced public speaking, and slowly ramped up. And that's the way to do it. Educated, baby step risk. Now, some people say, well, it's scary, you know? It's scary. You could get your heart broken. You'd be rejected. You could fail. I know it's scary, okay? I've been humiliated. I've been beaten. I've been shot at. And that's just from my wife after the last boys' weekend away. So I know it's scary out there. I know you got to take risks. But the best example that I can give you of someone who took risks successfully is Jim Carrey. Now, Jim Carrey, Dad, was a very funny guy, just as funny as Jim. But he decided to take the safe job and become an accountant. And one day, he got let go of that safe job. And Jim's family had to struggle to survive. Jim had to drop out of school and become a janitor. And he said, you know, I'm learning something from this. You can fail what you don't want. You might as well take a chance on doing what you love. And so he moved from Canada to Hollywood to pursue his dream of being a comedian and a comic actor. And it was rough. He tried out for Saturday Night Live 3 times, failed every single time. And while he had nothing there, he decided to do an experiment. He used the same 3 steps that I talk about in my book. And step 1, he wrote out a specific goal by a specific time. He said, I will have $10 million by Thanksgiving 1985. Wrote it on a check. Step 2, every morning and night, he read that goal. Pulled out that check every morning, night, every morning, night. Because after you read something over and over, you start to believe it. And belief is really important for your confidence. Step 3, he began visualizing it. He'd been imagining directors coming up to him and saying, I want to work with you. You do great work. I'd love to have you in my movie. Well, just before that deadline in that check, just before Thanksgiving 1985, he got cast in the movie Dumb and Dumber, and they gave him $10 million. And when his dad passed away, he took that little check out of his wallet and he put it in his casket as a final way to honor the person who inspired him. That's what it looks like when you take chances. The 4th thing I wish I knew, and I hope you know, is that you can fail and win anyway. If you are using your gifts for the greater good, you may stumble, but you will never fail on a permanent basis. I'll give you an example. When I ran for the United States Congress in 2000, there were 3 very high-profile races for the United States House of Representatives. There was my race in Florida. There was a race in Indiana with future Vice President Mike Pence, and then another guy was running in Illinois. Now, I won, Pence won, the guy in Illinois lost, a blowout, humiliating 31-point loss. And years later, I asked myself, whatever happened to that guy, you know, from Illinois? And then one day I saw him in the grocery store, in the checkout line, smiling ear to ear, as happy as can be, on the cover of People magazine. And his name is Barack Obama. That's the guy who lost. That's the guy who realized you can fail and win anyway. Now, it didn't rock my world when somebody told me you don't have what it takes to make it in fast food. And the reason is because most critics are morons. They're insecure. And they spent their life telling people, you can't do this, just because they can't do it. So let me tell you about some of the other failures. The reason I wasn't too worried. Walt Disney, when he was 22 years old, was fired from his job at the newspaper for not being creative enough. Later, he comes up with this idea to have a Mickey Mouse theme park, Disneyland. It was rejected by 300 bankers in a row who said it would never work. Martin Luther King Jr. gave the I Have a Dream speech. He got a C in public speaking from his teacher in seminary school. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. Oprah Winfrey was demoted from her job because they said, you, quote, you're not fit for television news. The Beatles were told by the first record label, Decca Records, that you have no way to make it in the record business. My favorite is a 29-year-old single mom who was on welfare and struggling. And she wrote a book, and she took it to a publisher. They said no. Took it to the next publisher, no. Next publisher, no. 12 publishers in a row, no, 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 no. Didn't think that this welfare mom had what it took. The 13th publisher said yes. And the name of that book is Harry Potter. and her name is J.K. Rowling, and she's a billionaire now. You can fail and win anyway. The fifth thing, don't take yourself too seriously. If you can laugh at yourself and at life, you will be unstoppable. Now, the best form of humor, I think, is self-deprecating humor because it relaxes people. It deflects criticism. It helps you build rapport. And so few people use it because it takes self-confidence to poke fun at yourself. But I'll give you an example of someone who did use it. Abe Lincoln was running for political office, and one of his opponents called him two-faced. He said, "Oh, I'm two-faced? If I had two faces, do you think I'd be wearing this one?" And that face is on Mount Rushmore now. So I think we know who got the last laugh. And to sum it all up for you, the 5 things: use your gifts, trust your intuition, take a chance, keep going, keep your sense of humor. If you do those 5 things, you can fly as high as you want to fly for as long as you want to go. Here's my one takeaway for you. At some point in your life, just like I had a fork in the road when I was in college, you're going to have a crossroads. And on one option is going to be playing it safe and being logical. Another option is going to be taking a risk, chasing your dreams, chasing the bears. My hope for you is that when you get the choice in life to play it safe or chase the bears, chase the freaking bears. Go Bucks.